Chapter 26. Now. Mac was on the ground in front of her, waiting. Waiting to see if Annie would reject him, push him away like she had every other time since he'd been back. He knew a little part of her wanted to. He knew Annie wanted revenge, but she had been punishing him for years, and Mac was ready to repent for his sins. The porcelain tile he'd chosen for his fancy new kitchen was digging into his knees, and Annie's fingers were still tangled in his hair, pulling just enough to sting. He waited, barely breathing, for her to turn him away. "Okay," she said, her voice a throaty whisper that made Mac's heart race, and his cock stiffen. "Okay, you're going to let me eat you out?" he asked, needing confirmation before he did something insane, and ended up getting his ass kicked. Annie clapped a hand over his mouth. Loud,
Don't
she
say it
gasped,
out.
and Mac laughed, barely believing what he was hearing. "I can do it, but I can't talk about it." "Yes, exactly. We don't need to talk about it." She held his gaze. She didn't want to talk about any of it, she never did. Mac would take it. He didn't know if this was a second chance or one last time or an apology, but he wanted it whatever it was. He wanted this moment with Annie. No regrets this time. He wasn't going anywhere, and if Annie still wanted him after this, he'd be ready. He leaned his forehead against her hip bone, breathing her in. Her little moan when he reached around and grabbed her ass made him glad he was already on his knees. That sound had haunted his dreams for over a decade. "This ass is still perfect," he said, his voice a low rumble. Annie's voice was nearly a whine. Her legs were already trembling, and he hadn't even unbuttoned her pants yet. Mac chuckled, looking up at her. "Just do it," she bit out, and it was so different from the last time when she had been gentle and nervous, when she'd kissed him and trusted him. But this felt more honest. There would be no kissing this time. She didn't trust him anymore. He hadn't earned it yet. This time was to exorcise their demons. He undid the button on her jeans, tugging down the zipper, urged on by Annie's harsh breathing and the feel of her fingers digging into his scalp. He pushed the pants down over her hips and groaned at the sight of her tiny lace panties. A pale blue that left nothing to the imagination, a string of satin over her hip, and around to a little lacy triangle in the back nestled right between the delectable curves of her ass. "If you had been wearing these the first time, I wouldn't have made it past getting your pants off. If this whole thing is going to be a compare and contrast to the last time ... single quotes." Annie's voice trailed off as Mac kissed and nipped the flesh of her thighs. "Es not," he said. "It won't be. But you should know you were perfect that first time, and somehow, you're even better now." Another little gasp as he licked along the string over her hip. And then it didn't matter anymore what she had been like then because he was here with her now. Annie wriggled the rest of the way out of her jeans. Mac helped tug them over her feet and tossed them aside before going back to his task. He didn't know if he was a better man now, but he knew he was better at this than he was at 19. And if nothing else came from this night, he was damn well going to settle the score. "Hold on, darling," he said, looking up at her one more time before he pushed those absurd panties aside. "Jesus, Annie, you're so beautiful." Annie tugged tighter on his hair, little whimpers escaping her. He knew he was teasing her, but he didn't mean to. He had two regrets in his life. One was leaving this woman the way he had, and the other was not doing this the first time around. He wanted to savor it, now that he'd been granted a second chance. He dug his fingers into her thigh and hooked her leg over his shoulder, opening her up to him. "Mac," Annie groaned, and the sound was so aggrieved that he was smiling when he finally let his mouth dip to her center. One lick had Annie gasping and Mac groaning. Another and Annie's legs were shaking, and Mac thought he might die here on his kitchen floor with his head between her thighs. But now was no time for dying. Mac was a man with something to prove. Annie had thought about Mac a lot over the past decade. Far too much, actually. And she had imagined similar scenarios to this one more times than she would ever admit. The fact that Mac was a frequent star in some of her most favorite fantasies was certainly not something she had ever said out loud. But this moment right here far surpassed anything she had imagined. At some point she'd ended up with her back against the wall, her legs still draped over Mac's shoulder, and his face still buried between her legs. He was licking and sucking and groaning like a man possessed. From somewhere outside of her body, Annie vaguely considered that his knees probably hurt from those tiles, and that his scalp probably hurt from the way she was using his hair as reins to move his head where she wanted it. But Mac was undeterred. Worship was the only word to describe what he was doing. And he had been right. He was very good at this. She fully believed that he did not leave women unsatisfied. Annie felt a brief stab of jealousy at the thought of the other women he'd practiced this skill on, but mostly she was just thankful that he had. Mac, she gasped, the pleasure building, and he looked up at her, his eyes dark, his hair a mess beneath her fingers. He looked as wrecked as she felt, unraveled, unmoored. Maybe this was a mistake. How would they ever come back from this? Take it, he said. Take what you want, Annie. Mac's desperate plea brought her back to the present. Take what you want. She wanted this, didn't she? Mac on his knees for her. She rolled her hips using Mac's tongue to get the exact pressure she needed. Mac groaned, the vibration adding to the sensations rioting through her. Do that again, she bit out, unable to stop. She couldn't. Not now. He did what she demanded, sending pleasure coursing through her body. His voice rumbled against her. Her heel dug into his back. Her toes curled. She was going to come like this, with Mac's mouth on her clit, and his hands on her hips, and her back against his wall. She was going to come with her heart a confused mess, and Mac looking up at her like he wanted more. Like he was here, and he wanted everything. Again, Annie rocked against him, and the pressure and tension and heat built inside of her. Another groan, another rock of her hips against Mac's perfect tongue, and Annie was unraveling, the orgasm rolling over her in waves so intense she couldn't stand. She couldn't see. She couldn't think. Mac held her up, pinning her to the wall as he lapped every bit of pleasure from her body. Standing, scooping her up on his way. She was boneless, sliding down the wall as Mac was standing scooping her up along the way. God, Annie, he was saying, his voice next to her ear, but Annie could barely take it in. That was so amazing. So fucking beautiful, he murmured against her skin as he lifted her up. What are you doing? She asked, even as she snuggled her face against his neck as he held her. I'm not staying here for the night, she said as Mac carried her out of the kitchen. Okay, darling, he said. Team serious. I'm not staying. Annie's voice was drifting closer to a whisper, exhaustion overtaking her. She'd been working so hard on this wedding and on her business, and on resisting Mac. She didn't think she could do it all anymore. And it was so nice in his arms. Maybe she could give in just for tonight. Even as she claimed she wasn't staying, Mac was carrying her upstairs. She'd never been upstairs, and her curiosity woke her up a bit. He carried her into the first room on the right. Is this your parents' old room? She asked as he lowered her onto the bed. No, I turned 2 of the smaller bedrooms into one bigger one for me. It seemed too weird to take my parents' room. Annie nodded. That would be weird. The room was a good size, but Mac's enormous bed took up most of it. This bed is huge, she said, running a hand over the plaid bedspread. Mac shrugged. I like to spread out. He turned and started rummaging through his closet. The rest of the room was tidy but lived in. A leather chair in the corner was draped in a small pile of shirts, and the dresser had a coffee mug from this morning still sitting on it. Little details of Mac's life that Annie never thought she'd see. The walls were a moody navy blue, but one was covered in colorful framed postcards and travel posters, reminders of all the years he was gone. Annie refused to think about the packet of postcards she still had under her bed, the ones she should have gotten rid of a long time ago. Mac emerged from his closet and tossed Annie a pair of sweatpants and an old lacrosse t-shirt. You can wear these. I'm not staying, Annie repeated, tugging on the pants. She couldn't cram herself back into her jeans at this hour. Okay, Mac said, still looking at her like he wanted to keep her. It was unnerving. I'm glad you moved out of the basement. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I mean it was cool when we were teenagers, but a grown man living in the basement would be kind of creepy. Wouldn't be a great place to bring women. I'm glad you're concerned about where I might bring women, Max said with a smirk, leaning against the doorframe of the closet. Turn around, Annie said, holding up the shirt. She resisted the urge to bury her face in it and inhale. Why, so I can change? Max stared at her. Annie, I was just face to face with your... Do not finish that sentence. Mac let out a low laugh of disbelief. Turn around, Annie insisted. He shook his head but complied, turning to face the wall. Just because we did that, Annie said, doesn't mean anything else changes between us. Oh really? Max said, addressing the wall. Yeah, really. We were only blowing off some steam, relieving tension. It was basically like doing yoga or going for a run, Max scoffed. Wow, Annabelle, you sure know how to make a guy feel good. Annie pulled the shirt over her head, relieved to be out of her sweater and bra. It had been an incredibly long day, and Mac's shirt was soft and worn and smelled just like him. "I'm not here to make you feel good." She said it too. Remind herself as much as him. Max snorted. "Well, joke's on you because that made me feel pretty darn good." Annie felt the heat rise to her cheeks and was glad Mac was still facing the wall. She was sure her face would give away exactly what she was feeling, and what she was feeling was highly ill-advised. "And it sure sounded like it made you feel good too," he said, running a hand through his hair. Annie took the opportunity to really look at him. She spent a lot of time avoiding looking directly at Mac. It was always far too dangerous. But now here she was in his bed, wearing his clothes, and looking at him seemed like the least of her worries. She took in the breadth of his shoulders and the flex of his forearms as he stood there, waiting for her. She took pleasure in the fact that his hair was a mess because of her fingers, and she wondered if he was still as hard as he was, while he was going down on her. God, what was she doing here? "I should probably go," she said, snapping out of it. Mac turned around. "You sure?" he asked. "You're welcome to stay the night. I'll sleep in the guest room sometimes." Annie thought about that day at the Christmas market when Mac asked her to hang out, and she wondered what would have happened if she had said no. Maybe she would have been able to have a healthy, lasting relationship in the 11 years since then. Maybe she wouldn't still be caught up in some stupid teenage fantasy. This moment felt similar to that one, like there was a fork in the road and Annie's life would change entirely depending on which path she took. She should go home. She'd gotten what she came for. She got her orgasm. She got Mac wanting her. If she left now, they could maybe go on as friends. Or something similar. People that got along, at least. Mac was watching her from his place propped up against the wall. He looked tired too, and maybe Annie was tired of punishing him. "It's probably cold outside," she whispered. "It definitely is," he said with a knowing smile. "And it's still snowing. And it's late," she murmured. "Really late? So maybe I'll just sleep for a bit," Annie whispered. And Mac's smile grew, but he didn't say anything. He nodded and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" "The guest room." "No," Annie said, taking a sharp turn down the wrong path. Mac froze. "No, no." Annie held his gaze, laying it all on the line again. Just like the last time. Just like the last time Mac held her heart and tossed it away. "Sleep here with me. Please, Annie. Just for tonight, Mac, please," she said again, and he wavered. She could see it on his face, the indecision, the questions about what this meant. But Annie didn't want to think about what this meant. She just wanted Mac next to her. "That's what you want?" "Yes," she said. "I just want a break. With you, okay?" Mac nodded. "Okay, Annie." He didn't ask her to turn around as he pulled the shirt over his head, and he grinned when he caught her looking. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll sleep with clothes on tonight. I don't want to find you gazing at me longingly." Annie rolled her eyes, but couldn't help the laugh that escaped her, happy for a break in the tension. "I will try my best not to stare at you all night." "Good," he said, shucking his jeans with the same lack off embarrassment as he did his shirt. "I wouldn't want anything to change between us. You know, just because of this," he said, gesturing to his body. Annie bit down a smile. He looked damn good standing there in only his underwear. But that wasn't the reason she felt everything shifting beneath her feet. She'd let her defenses down today. She'd let Mac be nice to her. Or maybe she'd finally noticed that Mac was nice to her, that he took care of her, that he knew her even after all this time. But the way he looked in his underwear didn't hurt either. "Get in the bed," she said. "I'm tired." She laid back in the pillows, tugging up the blanket so she could crawl under. Mac came around to her side of the bed and lifted the blanket, tucking it around her. He leaned down, a hand on either side of her head, the mattress dipping beneath his weight. Annie held her breath. She was surrounded by him, his heat, his scent, his stupid muscle-wide arms, that damn way he kept looking at her. It was too much. If he kissed her right now, she knew she'd be lost. She'd give him everything again and be left to pick up the pieces when it didn't work out. But he didn't kiss her. He just smiled and tucked the hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing along her cheek. She let her eyes fall closed and bit back a whimper of protest when Max stood up. She listened to the sound of him getting ready for bed and tried not to think about the consequences of what she'd done, of what she was currently still doing. The last thing she remembered before falling asleep was Mac crawling into bed next to her. He pulled her close, tucking her against him. "I get to be the big spoon this time," he whispered, and Annie fell asleep with a smile.